The Archon story quests in Genshin seem to be mini Archon quests, expanding on not just the Archons but also the history of the nations that they ruled. Except if you're Venti, then you get no second story quest because you're probably hiding the most important secretive lore that affects the likes of the primordial one and will only be revealed once the story ends. But I digress. Now, some of the things that Nahida's second story quest revealed was already known to us, but hadn't been mentioned outside of texts. But let's just go over all of it, because there is a lot to unpack here. Obviously, spoilers for the story quest, so if you haven't done it, go do it and then watch this video. At the beginning of the quest, we are introduced to some special elemental creatures or life forms which unsuspiciously look like the fungi that they are surrounded by. Because even though they look the same, the elemental energy that they possess is different. As the floating hydrofungus explains, when the other fungi use elemental energy, they draw this energy from the nature around them. But the elemental life forms have elemental energy of their own, which they draw their power from. In fact, they also belong to a completely different race which existed a long time ago and have evolved in order to adapt to the environment around them. Other than this lesson in evolution, she also mentioned how she came from an ancient race that lived peacefully until they were destroyed by the apocalypse. Now, this part of what she said is slightly complex. This apocalypse that hit them destroyed their home and led them to leave and search for a safe place to survive. But the apocalypse also changed them. They became it. She also mentioned that she learned over time that this apocalypse came as forbidden knowledge, which we know has been purged by Nahida. The reason this fungus was sick at the beginning of this quest was because there was a void in them, as the forbidden knowledge that destroyed them was also a part of them. Now, how did the forbidden knowledge or apocalypse change them? Their physical form can undergo drastic changes. Unlike the hydrofungus we met, who was able to take the form of fungi to adapt, we also saw the life forms in the desert that had warped into strange forms to adapt, and even though they changed, they were far weaker than the floating hydrofungus. Side note, one of these life forms looks suspiciously like the specters, which is interesting. Anyway, getting back to the effects of forbidden knowledge on these life forms, we also got to know that the Withering was their final form when they met their end. So the power of the apocalypse slowly eats away at them, eventually turning them into a blight in the form of the Withering. But what caused the apocalypse? Apep told us that the Dragon King believed that forbidden knowledge could be used to defeat the heavenly principles. This is presumably during the war between the Primordial One and the 7 Dragon Sovereigns. So in order to get this forbidden knowledge, he acquired the power of the darkness from outside the world and led the dragons to war. This war was at such an unprecedented scale that it almost destroyed Tevat. After the war, the heavenly principles that were the victors and thus had the right to shape the world sent celestial nails down to mend the land, which obviously destroyed the human civilization that lived there as well. But the death of the Dragon King did not stop Apep, who continued to look for forbidden knowledge from the corners of Tevat, which was already collapsing due to the war. But Celestia sent another nail to stop Apep, which ended up turning the lush grasslands into a barren desert. The stories of this nail have been in artifact descriptions for a while now, and as we know, Deshret went to look for forbidden knowledge as well, even though the goddess of flowers warned him against it. But eventually she changed her mind and decided to help him seek it. Apep made a deal with him to share all the knowledge that he had acquired, because even after losing the war and being stopped by the celestial nails, Apep still harbored the desire to defeat the heavenly principles. But even after literally eating Deshret, all it gained was the apocalypse, which only ended up corrupting Apep, and when Nahida erased the forbidden knowledge, creating a void in it. There are a few things to break down here. This quest gave us an idea about how celestial nails work. Before, we were aware that they were sent to mend the land, but she clearly meant it very literally. In the chasm, we learned that the celestial nails have the power to purify and stabilize energy that shouldn't exist in Tevat. When forbidden knowledge comes in contact with the light, it changes forms and is contained in the oozing filth that we have seen all around the chasm. It is also interesting that what we've witnessed of Celestia's power is so vague. For example, we've heard of all the civilizations that have been affected by Celestia, how Celestia is not from Tevat, and when it comes to seeing their power, the only thing that we see is the celestial nails. The reason I bring this up is because when the cataclysm is described, there is no light. If we observed Ei's memories of Makoto's death, the We Will Be Reunited trailer, the cataclysm has distinct red skies. and the red cubes we've seen during our encounter with the sustainer. But the celestial nails are blue, known to shine light that can dissipate the abyssal energy, or at least convert it into a form like the oozing filth in the chasm, which is not forbidden knowledge or the apocalypse or the cataclysm. What I'm trying to say or ask is, where were the celestial nails during the disaster of Kandria? All the descriptions talk about the catastrophe and how countless creatures of the abyss spread out from Kandria to the rest of the world. But where is the celestial nails in any of these retellings? If we assume that the outbreak of forbidden knowledge was so great that it could not be contained by the power of the nail, it would explain this, but it's still very suspicious. The reason I'm even bringing this up is because there is something very peculiar about Kandria's curse and what happened to the elemental life forms that were affected by the apocalypse. Both suffered from changes in their physical body, but most importantly, the loss of important memories. The Hilichurls suffer the more dire consequences of this, their minds deteriorating at a much worse rate than the pureblood Kandrians, who also slowly seem to lose their memories and their minds. The elemental life forms also had similar symptoms, with some of them being able to retain their consciousness with the loss of memory over time, but others who were affected much worse. Unlike the elemental life forms that were able to adapt to their surroundings, the others ended up spending so much of their life force in order to adapt that all that is left of them is the instinct to survive and the search for the energy to do so. The description of the new Hilichurls is very interesting considering all this. Hilichurl wanderers do not belong to any Hilichurl tribe. It is almost as if they are searching for the fated genesis of their kind, seeking to uncover some bygone splendor that once belonged to their people. If these monsters, capable only of crude language and bereft of missing history, could record their own epics and legends, the Hilichurl wanderers would be heroes in set tales. Even the Hilichurls spread out around the rest of the world have no history or memory of their civilization. While we know that their numbers increased after the cataclysm 500 years ago, they have existed for thousands of years in Teyvat, not knowing where they came from. Now, another focus of this quest was memory, and very importantly so, because everything always comes down to memories. Elemental life forms come into contact with the apocalypse, they lose their memories. People of Kandria get cursed, they lose their memories. Some even have weirdly timed relapses of these memories. Dane, I'm looking at you. Erosion occurs and all the affected lose their memories. For example, Ajdaha. A made the Raiden Shogun explicitly to avoid erosion because it was a way to conserve Inazuma's eternity. How do memories preserve eternity? I wish I knew the answer to that. If you look at the description of the Frostbearer, which is a 4-star weapon from Dragonspine which some of us were saving for Signora, it talks about how this weapon was created when someone poured a crimson essence upon it, and the tree that should have died suddenly remembered its past. The revival of the tree happened through its memory coming back. An important point to note is that this crimson essence came from Durin's blood, which was full of abyssal energy. When the Abyss sibling talks about the chance regarding a plan that the Abyss Order might have a chance at, she wishes to revive the homeland. But maybe she was just trying to revive their memories? But why are memories such an important component? I have a very speculative theory which I really can't completely stand by, but I'll still tell you. In the ley lines of the world of Teyvat runs elemental energy, but what also runs through them are memories. All these memories are stored in Irminsul, which is connected to the rest of the world through the ley lines. During Nahida's story quest, the elemental life form decided to sacrifice herself in order to cure a pep, and all the memories of her and the life forms we carried along the way ended up filling the void in a pep, because these memories, knowledge, and emotions were reverted into elemental energy, which is what runs through the ley lines, and so does knowledge and memories. But what if the power of the apocalypse or forbidden knowledge is also just that? Knowledge and memories. Rukdevta described forbidden knowledge as the kind of knowledge that doesn't belong to this world, or the truth that cannot be understood. When introduced to Irminsul, which already has memories, forbidden knowledge corrupts it because those memories are not something that the world tree can process or even recognize. When it comes into contact with life forms in Teyvat, it corrupts their minds because their brains aren't built to process this much information. When the goddess of flowers warned Deshret about how Celestia dealt with the invaders, she speaks about the rising tide of delusions, which was stopped by the celestial nails sent by the heavenly principles. But what if these delusions were just the memories from beyond Tevat? And that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Let me know your own thoughts in the comments below. If you wish to talk about lore or anything related to Genshin with me, I stream at twitch.tv/pixiebub. Come say hi. I will see you in the next one, and bye-bye.